That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, my dudes, we have to make some major adjustments here. Last week, we got the news that Aaron Rodgers was staying in Green Bay. I've already gone out and I've given you my initial reactions on where I think Davante Adams and Aaron Jones should have risen to. But to be completely honest, I think what we have found across the entire fantasy football community is people are too stuck to the prior prices that they had on Davante Adams and Aaron Jones. Because obviously so many people have already been drafting in their fantasy leagues this offseason. People have been using great platforms like Underdog Fantasy, where you can go through, you can get in real money fantasy drafts that are best ball, so you don't have to manage them through the season. You can really prepare for the main fantasy football drafts that you're going to be having in the coming weeks that are high stakes, that you care about. And I will say that's by far and away the best way that you can prepare for those drafts. And also, if you go over there and you want to hop in some best ball Underdog fantasy drafts, make sure you download the app. It will be down in the description below. Use promo code FLOCK. You get a free $25 to play with when you make a $10 deposit. And at the same time, if you use promo code FLOCK, it supports this channel so much that I am more than willing to send you our 2021 draft guide for free. So literally on Underdog Fantasy, use promo code FLOCK. You get a free $25 with a $10 deposit. So that's pretty much a free $15. And on top of that, you're getting our 2021 draft guide. Please don't miss out on that. But anyway, people have been drafting there, and we have seen ADPs starting to change. I mean, on Underdog, you had Davante Adams and Aaron Jones going in the middle of the second round just a month ago. We actually got Davante Adams in our $1,000 Patreon league, but we took him at the 207. And now you've seen his value actually rise up to where he's going as a late first round pick currently in fantasy drafts. I think that this is still too low on Davante Adams. I think we need to take a step back. We need to release our prior evaluations of these players with the uncertainty of Aaron Rodgers, take a deep dive in where they should actually be going in drafts. And let's start it off with Adams, who, I'm just going to say it, over there on Patreon, we have Davante Adams ranked as our 4th player overall. I mean, usually you're going to find about 6, 7, 8 players in respective tiers when you go through and you look at our rankings, whether that's with the draft guide, whether that's through Patreon. You're going to see those tiers spaced out evenly with groupings of players. But at the very top, the tiers are short because you see an exponential drop off in the players that you are getting. So we have CMC in tier 1 by himself. And then in tier 2, we have both Dalvin Cook and Alvin Kamara. And then when you go down to tier 3, I think all the players in that range at running back have their own question marks to the point where I feel comfortable putting Davante Adams as our 4th player overall. So we are going to be drafting Davante Adams everywhere this upcoming offseason. I mean, this upcoming season. I'm sorry, I forgot that it's already August. Drafts are here. But anyway, let me talk about the range that we actually have ranked in the first round. So we have Davante Adams at 4. At 5, we have Saquon Barkley. Now, of course, with Barkley, the main hesitation in putting him over Davante Adams are, really twofold. A, you have the injury concerns, which you cannot overlook for a running back coming off that significant of a knee injury. I do still have Saquon Barkley over a Derrick Henry in a PPR format because Saquon Barkley is going to catch 70 more passes, which we know is a ridiculous amount. And I think if you really pay attention to what matters in fantasy, you really have to have Saquon Barkley there. But also, the offensive line is really bad. So there are some major red flags. Now, Derrick Henry, we've talked about all those red flags before. The fact that, he goes over 2,000 yards rushing. He's still not even a top 3 running back in fantasy. The fact that he's 27 years old. This is where you historically see the fall off for running backs. The fact that you actually see Derrick Henry leading the NFL in touches over the past 2 years, which is, going to be concerning for a 27-year-old running back. So there are some red flags there. Then with Ezekiel Elliott, who is our 7th player ranked overall, you have the fall off that you saw last year in his efficiency. Now, I understand there's a lot of explanations behind that, in that you had the injury to Dak Prescott. You had the offensive line playing really at a subpar spot compared to what you're going to expect in 2021 now that they're a little healthier. So all of those respective running backs have their own red flags. I just don't see any with Davante Adams. And if we go through, I am willing to say that Davante Adams is possibly the highest upside pick that you can make in fantasy right now outside of Christian McCaffrey. Because we go through and you look at Davante Adams, and in 2020, the numbers pop out automatically. This is a player that averages over 25 points per game. Davante Adams in 2020 averages over 25 points per game. He's the wide receiver 1. It isn't even remotely close. He does this with volume. He does this with efficiency. I mean, he gets over a touchdown a game. He has over 10 targets a game, which is definitely the more important thing. And he comes close to 100 receiving yards a game at the same time. In 2019, he was the wide receiver 6. In 2018, he was the wide receiver 1 yet again. But I want to go back to the season that Davante Adams just had, because I want to put it into some context with what we've actually seen historically, because I have not heard literally anybody talk about this, and I have no idea how it's even possible that people are overlooking this, because it maybe is the craziest thing that happened in 2020. But we pull up Davante Adams in that 2020 season, and you go through and you look at the snap counts and you actually realize, oh crap, we forgot. Hell, Davante Adams in week 2 left early due to an ankle injury. He left at the beginning of the game, so we really didn't get to see what Davante Adams would have been that week. So when you're looking at him average close to 26 fantasy points per game, that's minus a week that he actually had to play. So if you remove week 2 and the 6.6 points that he actually scored, and you recalculate just how many points per game he had, I mean, Davante Adams actually dropped over 27 points per game at the wide receiver position. And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, Mason, I mean, he had an injury. Maybe it was a smaller sample. Maybe it's just because he only played 8 or 9 weeks. He was able to just go through and run hot a couple of games. No, that's a 13-game sample. Even after taking out week 2, the game that he left early, in 13 games, Davante Adams averaged over 27 fantasy points per game, 27.21 to be exact. Now we go through and we try to figure out how many fantasy points this would have been through a 16-game season if Davante Adams stayed healthy the entire time and he remained on this pace. Davante Adams would have scored 435 fantasy points. Now to explain to y'all how many points 435 fantasy points are, let's go historically. Let's look up the highest scoring wide receiver seasons of all time. Okay, so this isn't just over the past 5 years. This isn't just looking at a few wide receivers. No, these are the highest scoring wide receiver seasons of all time. Starting off at 1 with Randy Moss in that New England Patriots offense in 2007, where he drops 385 fantasy points. So Davante Adams was on pace for 50 more fantasy points than the highest score ever at the wide receiver position. Now, Marvin Harrison in 2002 had 382 points. Antonio Brown had 380 in 2014. Antonio Brown also had 376 in 2015. Randy Moss had 376 in 2003. Michael Thomas in 2019 had 372. Julio Jones had 365 in 2015. And then Davante Adams, who only played 13 and a half games, actually comes in 8th on this list in total fantasy points with 360. And like we said, he only played 13 and a half weeks. I mean, he left week 2 early. He missed 2 weeks on top of that. So you consider that Davante Adams put up the 8th best wide receiver season of all time in a season where he got hurt. And I think that the context behind this completely changes. Now, I understand that you're going to have the argument, well, Mason, he scored 1.3 touchdowns per game. That's going to regress. And I 100% agree with you. I think the entire touchdown rate for this entire offense is going to regress based on how out of line Aaron Rodgers was last year and how that has to come down closer to the league average. But if you go through and you assume that Aaron Rodgers is going to significantly regress with his touchdown rate, which was what we have seen from the league leader every single year over the past pretty much decade, what you actually have is the opportunity to, instead of taking touchdowns away for Davante Adams, who's been a very high touchdown scorer throughout his entire career. I mean, there's a clear player, in my opinion, that could potentially regress way more than Davante Adams, and it could still give Adams his own production. And that is Robert Tonyan, because we've already addressed Davante Adams had over 10 targets a game last year. I mean, he was a player that was not only fueled off of efficiency, but also volume, which is what you should expect for the wide receiver who's just coming off the best wide receiver season of all time. Whereas Robert Tonyan, on the other hand, this is a player that didn't have any volume. He just kind of got lucky with the efficiency that he saw, where with only 59 total targets, he had 11 total touchdowns. So Robert Tonyan is definitely in line for some major regression. I don't necessarily want to be taking away everything from Davante Adams. But what is crazy is if you go through and you go, okay, Davante Adams, yes, of course, he is going to regress. There's no way in hell that he puts up that same type of season again. We're not expecting him to be the best wide receiver of all time yet again in 2021. We go through and we go, okay, let's take away 10% of his production. Let's say instead of every 10 points that he gets, instead he only gets 9 points. Well, then if you take that pace that he had from last year, you regress it by 10%, he scores 391 fantasy points this upcoming season. Now, going back to what we said with Randy Moss in 2007. Randy Moss in 2007, who was previously the best wide receiver of all time for fantasy, scored 385. So even if you regress Davante Adams by 10% of his pace last year, he still puts up the best wide receiver season of all time. Now, this is ridiculous, and of course, he's going to regress more than that. But the point here is Davante Adams is an extreme outlier. This is someone that you can expect to lock in a top 3 wide receiver finish for you. So he has that elite ceiling to go over 25 fantasy points per game, and he has one of the highest floors, if not the highest floor, from any draft pick that you can actually be drafting. So I think if you look at the same running backs in that range, like a Saquon Barkley, a Derrick Henry, and Ezekiel Elliott, all guys that are going over Davante Adams in fantasy drafts right now. I mean, I think that if you actually look at those running backs and you compare them to Davante Adams, all of those running backs, I mean, they are way, way riskier. And their ceiling isn't any higher than what you actually have with Davante Adams. So Adams is going to be my number 4 player overall, clearly my wide receiver 1. And if we go through right now and we look at the recent underdog drafts that we've had, so of course, I mean, I live stream on Underdog every single night. If you want to come out to a live stream, get in an underdog draft with us, be on the channel, make sure you use promo code FLOCK on Underdog, deposit $10, get a free $25. But anyway, if we go through and we look at the 4 drafts that we have done since Aaron Rodgers has officially decided to stay in Green Bay, I mean, we actually drafted Davante Adams twice at the 106, where we got lucky. We pulled the 106, and Davante Adams fell to us both times. Running backs like Ezekiel Elliott going over Davante Adams, I don't necessarily understand it. Of course, we're going to be drafting Davante Adams at the 106 when we get that opportunity. Now, Genius is someone that came out to a $100 draft with us the other night. He decided to take Davante Adams at the 105, and then Icklewick had Davante Adams fall all the way to the 108 in one of our other live stream drafts on Underdog. So yeah, I mean, you've seen Davante Adams in these flock drafts where I'm literally on the live stream going, I think Davante Adams is the best pick here. Davante Adams, Davante Adams, Davante Adams. He is still going too low in my opinion. And the majority of drafts that you're going to be doing on Underdog, you're going to be getting Davante Adams instead of at the 5th, 6th, 7th pick. I think you're going to be getting him at the 8th, 9th, 10th. So what I advise you doing right now is go to the description of the video, download Underdog, use promo code FLOCK, get a free $25, then turn that $25 into some massive profits by drafting Davante Adams in the middle of the first, because I promise you, by the time we get closer to the start of the year, Davante Adams is going to be consistently going at pick 4, pick 5, so you're getting a discount right now that I promise you is not going to be there much longer. Okay, so now let's go to another player in this offense that I don't necessarily want to say in line with his value in our rankings a month ago, but now I think we need to jump him up over his ADP. His ADP has risen a little bit since the Aaron Rodgers news, but we have jumped him up a ton in Aaron Jones. Because we go through and we look at Aaron Jones. This is a running back that's 26 years old, so you're beginning to kind of worry about the age. I'm more so worried once you get into age 27, 28. That's when I'm sounding those red alarms. So Jones, not necessarily a massive deal with the age. We also know that he signed a big contract extension this past season. And you go down, you look at the past 2 years for Aaron Jones. In 2020, he was the running back 5 in points per game. In 2019, he was the running back 4 in points per game. Now he's doing this because he fits that Alvin Kamara. He fits that DeAndre Swift. He fits that Travis Etienne mold that we always talk about. He's one of these running backs that gets targets out of the backfield and gets usage at the goal line. Those are by far and away the most important things that you can find in fantasy football, especially if you're getting them in one of the best offenses in the league. So with Aaron Jones, I'm going to be all over him. I mean, we actually go through and we look at his Underdog ADP right now, and surprisingly, he's going at pick 14 on Underdog. Now, of course, this is going to continue to climb as more people really try to reevaluate their stance on Aaron Jones. I promise you, this is going to get to the first round. But if we go through and we look at the past 4 drafts that we've actually had over on Underdog since the Aaron Rodgers news, I mean, he actually goes at the 111 from raw, so that's going to be the highest point we've actually seen Aaron Jones drafted. And I'll give a quick shout out to raw. I mean, one of the sharpest drafters that we've been drafting with every single night over there in the live stream on Underdog. And then at the 203, Jake decided to take him after falling way further than he should have. At the 201, Zachary Link took him. And at the 112, he also went. So you're just seeing consistently Aaron Jones go at the 1-2 turn. And in my opinion, he should be closer to a middle first round pick, where we go through, we look at our 2021 rankings that can be found on Patreon. And currently I have Aaron Jones ranked as our 9th player overall. We have him directly behind Ezekiel Elliott and Tyreek Hill. We have him directly ahead of Austin Eckler and Stephon Diggs. Now, I will say a quick side note. I know we're not showing him in the screenshot of our rankings, but because he's a slightly lower, but Nick Chubb has been going over Aaron Jones in fantasy drafts. I am the first person to admit Nick Chubb is a much more talented running back than Aaron Jones. But when you're playing fantasy football, when you are looking for these fake points that are led to by receptions out of the backfield in a PPR format, as well as those touchdowns, there is no reason at all to ever consider drafting Nick Chubb over Aaron Jones. If you're playing in a non-PPR format, hell yeah, go get Nick Chubb. But if you're playing in PPR, never consider making that pick. Aaron Jones is the correct decision there. But anyway, going beyond that, let's talk about why I actually have Aaron Jones as our running back 6, running back 7, compared to being a top 5 option like he's been over the past 2 years. And the main reason for this is Jamal Williams leaving the offense and A.J. Dillon coming in. So here I understand Jamal Williams, a running back that has seen a considerable amount of touches over the past few years. But with Jamal Williams, he's someone that gets touches between the 20-yard lines, just those meaningless carries. And honestly, I am completely fine with the running back getting those touches, which is why I don't mind drafting DeAndre Swift this year, because I think that Jamal Williams is going to be getting those meaningless touches in Detroit, while DeAndre Swift gets the usage at the goal line and gets the usage in the receiving game. That's why I don't mind drafting Travis Etienne, because I think James Robinson is going to be getting those meaningless carries between the 20s, while Travis Etienne soaks up all the valuable work. But besides this, so Jamal Williams leaving this offense does in theory open up more touches for Aaron Jones, but they took A.J. Dillon in the 2nd round last year. So A.J. Dillon, the one thing that I have to admit that I am scared about with Aaron Jones, and why I'm not willing to move him up into the Alvin Kamara tier, why I'm not willing to move him up over Ezekiel Elliott, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, is that in the case of Aaron Jones, I'm afraid that his usage in the red zone is going to slightly go down. Now, if they're on the 10-yard line, I'm still expecting Aaron Jones to be in there, given the fact that when you're in that personnel package, you're still wanting your running back to be running routes out of the backfield. You're not necessarily just wanting them to drive it up the middle. So I'm not too worried about that. But what I am possibly worried about is, given the fact that A.J. Dillon is slightly larger with his BMI than Derrick Henry, I am worried about them getting to the 1-2 yard line, and instead of having Aaron Jones in there, instead having A.J. Dillon, because he profiles to be a much better goal line running back. So with Aaron Jones, I still think that he's a fantastic value. If you're getting him in the beginning of the 2nd round, the end of the 1st round, I'm pushing him up to pick 9. But I can guarantee you that these players are going to continue to rise with their fantasy price, which is why I want to get this video out pretty damn soon. So if Aaron Jones starts to kind of get into conversations of possibly going over a Saquon Barkley and Ezekiel Elliott, a Derrick Henry, a Tyreek Hill, a Davante Adams, I want to cut it there, because I will say there's one concern that you have with Aaron Jones, and that's potentially A.J. Dillon getting usage at the goal line. Now, thank you, my dudes. I really hope y'all enjoyed this video. And of course, if y'all did, please go down there, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. And yeah, that should be it. I will see y'all with the video tomorrow. We've gotten a ton of new members joining the flock. Thank you, Grind for Gold, Devin, Bungified, Brian, Brody, Victor, Chris, Grant, Trevor, and David. Thank you, my dudes.